You pulled it out of that yellow cardboard box. You felt the weight, real metal, cold against your fingers. You turned it over, and on the bottom, in tiny raised letters, it said something you didn't understand yet. Made in England. You didn't care where it was made. You cared that it fit in your pocket. If you haven't seen our video on the slot car raceway that disappeared, the link is right here. You didn't find it at a toy store. That's what people forget. You found it at the drugstore, on a spinning metal rack near the register, right next to the candy bars and the comic books. You could see the little yellow boxes through the wire frame, stacked 3 deep, and you would turn that rack slowly, one click at a time, studying every single one before you made your choice. Or you found it at the 5 and dime, hanging on a peg behind the counter, or at the grocery store while your mother was picking out canned peaches and you were 3 aisles away, standing on your toes, reaching for a box that was just barely out of reach. It was always there, everywhere. Not locked behind glass, not reserved for special occasions, just sitting on a rack at kid height, waiting for someone with 39 cents and a decision to make. 39 cents. That was your allowance. That was the change you got back from buying a Coke. That was the nickel your grandmother pressed into your hand and the dimes you found between the couch cushions. You didn't need your parents. You didn't need a birthday. You didn't need Christmas. For 39 cents, you could own something real, something heavy, something that looked exactly like the car your father drove to work every morning, except this one was 3 inches long and it was yours. They were called Matchbox cars. And if you were a boy in America in the 1960s, you had them. Not some of them, all of them. The red double-decker bus that didn't look like anything on your street but somehow felt important. The cement mixer with the barrel that actually turned. The green army truck with the canvas top. The milk truck. The Cadillac Fleetwood that was so long it barely fit in your palm. The Mercedes ambulance with a little cross on the side. The Ford station wagon that looked just like the one parked in your driveway, right down to the little silver bumper and the 2-tone paint. You held it up next to the real thing once, didn't you? You compared them, kneeling on the driveway, one eye closed, squinting back and forth between the real car and the tiny one in your hand. And the little one passed the test. That was the magic. These were not cartoon cars, not race cars, not spaceships. They were copies of real things. The truck that delivered your milk, the bus you saw downtown, the tractor on your uncle's farm, the fire engine that screamed past your house on a Tuesday night. Holding one was like holding a piece of the adult world that had been shrunk down to your size, made just for you. And because they were real, the games you played with them felt real too. They were made entirely of metal. The early ones had no windows, no interior, just a solid chunk of painted die-cast zinc alloy that felt like a small weapon in a child's hand. You could throw one across the room and pick it up without a scratch. You could bury one in the sandbox and dig it up 2 weeks later and it still looked brand new. They were indestructible. They were not precious. They were meant to be used hard and put away wet and dragged across concrete and dropped from the top of the front steps to see what would happen. Nothing happened. That was the point. And then there was the case, the vinyl carrying case, dark blue or black, shaped like a little briefcase, with a handle on top and plastic trays inside. Each tray had 12 slots and each slot held one car. You could see them all at once when you opened it. 48 cars lined up in rows, each one parked nose first in its own little garage. You carried that case everywhere, to your friend's house, to the backyard, to the back seat of the family car on a long drive to somewhere you didn't want to go. That case was your world. Portable, organized, complete. You knew exactly which slot was missing a car, and you knew exactly which one you were going to fill next. Some of those cases unfolded into play mats with printed roads and little buildings, But you didn't need the mat. You had the sandbox. You had the edge of the sidewalk where the crack made a perfect lane divider. You had the dirt patch behind the garage where you carved roads with a stick and built bridges out of popsicle sticks and drove your Matchbox fleet through a city that existed only in your head. You had the bathtub, where a capsized tanker truck became the Titanic. You had the kitchen floor on a rainy Saturday, where the linoleum became the Daytona Speedway, and the finish line was the spot where the tile changed color. You didn't need batteries, you didn't need a screen, you needed a flat surface and about 3 inches of clearance. At school, you traded them. Not baseball cards, those were for the other kids. You traded Matchbox cars, a fire truck for a Jaguar, a tow truck for a Mercedes ambulance. The economy of the schoolyard was built on which model was new, which was rare, and which one Bobby down the street had 2 of. There was no guidebook. There was no eBay. The value was whatever you felt in your gut when someone held out a car you'd never seen before and said, "What'll you give me for it?" 100 million of them were sold in America every single year. Not 100 million worldwide. 100 million in America alone. At their peak, the company behind them was building 1,000 cars every 60 seconds. 5 million a week. 14 factories around the world running day and night to make sure that every drugstore in every town in every state had a metal rack near the register with a row of tiny yellow boxes that said the same thing. Matchbox, a Lesney product. The man who started it all was named Jack Odell. He was an engineer, a tool maker, the kind of man who could look at a broken machine and fix it before the foreman finished his cigarette. In 1947, Jack and 2 friends, Leslie Smith and Rodney Smith, old school pals who'd served together in the Royal Navy, rented a bombed-out pub called the Rifleman in North London and started a die casting shop. They made door handles, windshield wiper parts, ceiling hooks, nothing glamorous, but Jack had a daughter named Annie. And Annie's school had a rule: you could only bring toys that fit inside a matchbox. So Jack went home to his workshop and made her one, a tiny road roller cast in brass, painted red and green, small enough to fit inside a matchbox. Annie brought it to school and every kid in her class wanted one. Jack made a mold, cast a few more, and without meaning to, without a business plan, without a marketing strategy, he started something that would take over the world. The first 3 models were a road roller, a dump truck, and a cement mixer, sold in little yellow cardboard boxes designed to look like matchboxes. By 1960, Lesney Products was exporting 70 million of them. The line was called the 1 to 75, exactly 75 models, updated every year, never more, never less. When a new car came in, an old one went out. For 40 years, it was elegant, it was disciplined, and it worked. By 1968, Matchbox was the largest small die-cast car brand on Earth. The Queen gave them an export award. The factories couldn't build them fast enough. And then on one afternoon in May, everything changed. Mattel, the biggest toy company in America, launched a new product called Hot Wheels. They were faster, they were louder, they were everything Matchbox wasn't. Where Matchbox gave you a perfect miniature copy of your father's station wagon, Hot Wheels gave you a custom Camaro with red line tires that could blow the doors off anything on a bright orange plastic track. Where Matchbox was real, Hot Wheels was fantasy. Where Matchbox rolled across the carpet like a car on a highway, Hot Wheels screamed down a ramp like a rocket on rails. And for a 10-year-old boy in 1968, that wasn't a hard choice. Or maybe it was. Maybe it was the hardest choice you ever made, because choosing Hot Wheels meant turning your back on something you loved. It meant admitting that the little green army truck in your carrying case wasn't cool anymore. that the realistic cars you'd been collecting for years, the ones that looked like your dad's car, the ones that felt solid and honest in your hand, were somehow not enough. Some boys switched overnight, some held on for a year, maybe two, watching their friends race Hot Wheels down orange tracks while they sat on the curb with a Matchbox tow truck that couldn't keep up. And some boys, the stubborn ones, the loyal ones, never switched at all. They kept buying Matchbox right through the storm. They kept filling their carrying cases. They kept believing that real was better than fast. Those boys are the ones watching this video right now. Matchbox didn't see it coming. One industry writer said they were caught with their pants down. The company tried to fight back fast. They redesigned the wheels, thinner axles, lower friction. They called it the super fast line. And by 1970, almost every model had been converted. But wheels weren't enough. Matchbox panicked. They started making fantasy cars of their own, wild hot rods and bubble-top dragsters with names like Gruesome Twosome and Hot Rod Dragwar. Cars that looked nothing like anything your father would ever drive. Cars that looked nothing like Matchbox. One collector who grew up in that era put it this way: "My older brothers had the early superfasts, cool, familiar cars with the new wheels, but then Matchbox went bonkers, and the bonkers part killed it for me. They lost themselves. The very thing that made them special, the quiet dignity of a perfectly scaled real car in a little yellow box, they traded it for chrome and flash and speed, trying to be something they were never meant to be. They tried to out Hot Wheels. And it didn't work. Because when you build your whole identity on being real, you can't suddenly become fantasy and expect people to follow." Through the 1970s, things got worse. A strike that shut the factories for 8 weeks, a fire at the Rochford plant, a flood that came right after. The British economy was collapsing, dragging down every manufacturer that hadn't moved overseas. Lesney tried everything. They bought a doll company, a model kit company, anything to diversify. Nothing stuck. On June 11, 1982, Lesney Products was declared bankrupt. Not because they made a bad product, not because they lost their touch, but because the country around them was falling apart and they couldn't survive the cost of making things where they'd always made them in England by hand with care. The machines that made 1,000 cars a minute went silent. The workers who had spent 20 years pouring molten metal and hand-painting headlights walked out of the factory for the last time. And somewhere in America, in a million attics and closets and basements, the carrying cases started collecting dust. They were not alone. The same year, the company that made Dinky toys went under. The year after that, the company that made Corgi followed. An entire generation of British toy makers, the men who had given the world the finest small metal cars ever produced, erased in a single economic winter. Not because they failed, because the world moved on without them. A businessman from Hong Kong named David Ye bought the Matchbox name and moved production to Macau, then to mainland China. The yellow boxes disappeared, replaced by plastic blister packs. The metal got thinner, the paint got cheaper, the little raised letters on the bottom no longer said "Made in England." In 1987, the last factory on English soil, the Rochford plant in Essex, closed its doors for good. The machines went quiet, the parking lot emptied, and a piece of something that had once mattered to every boy in the English-speaking world simply stopped existing in the place where it began. Matchbox changed hands twice more, first to Tyco Toys, then in 1997 to Mattel, the same Mattel that had launched Hot Wheels in 1968, the same company that had walked into Matchbox's house 30 years earlier, kicked the furniture over, and taken half the children in America with them. Now they own the name, the tooling, the legacy, everything. The brand that nearly killed Matchbox in 1969 now kept it alive as a sub-brand. The cars were smaller, lighter. The metal was mostly gone. You could snap one in half if you tried hard enough. They sold them at Walmart for $1.25. They came in a plastic blister pack that you ripped open and threw away because there was no little yellow box to save. But Jack Odell, the man who started it all with a brass road roller for his daughter, he didn't stop. After Lesney went bankrupt, he bought some of the old tooling, took it to a new workshop, and started a company called L.E. Doe. That's Odell spelled backwards. He made die-cast cars the old way, heavy, detailed, real. He kept making them until he passed away in 2007 at the age of 87. He never stopped building little metal cars. He never stopped doing the one thing he knew how to do. The thing that started because a girl named Annie needed something small enough to take to school. The next time you're cleaning out the attic and you find a vinyl case with a broken latch and 48 slots and maybe 19 or 20 little metal cars still parked inside, don't put them on eBay. Don't throw them away. Don't let your wife tell you it's junk. Pick one up. Feel the weight of it. Roll it across your palm. Turn it over, read the bottom, made in England. Remember what that felt like. Remember the spinning rack at the drugstore. Remember the sandbox roads and the popsicle stick bridges. Remember the afternoon you traded your tow truck for Bobby's Jaguar and walked home like you just pulled off the deal of the century. Remember what it was like to hold something small and heavy and real, something that cost 39 cents and lasted forever. That little car in your hand right now is 50 years old. The paint is chipped, one wheel doesn't spin anymore, the bumper is bent from the time you dropped it off the front porch. It's worth maybe $8 on a good day, but what it gave you, the hours, the roads, the worlds you built from nothing but dirt and imagination, that was worth everything. And no one can put that in a blister pack. They don't make them like that anymore. They don't make anything like that anymore, and they never will again.